Good afternoon. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Thursday, January 16th, 2025 at 1 o'clock, and we're continuing to go through the Budget Adjustment Act. And our next guests are from the Department of Children and Families, also known as DCF. So Commissioner Winters and our Financial Director, Megan, with my glasses, Megan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Trying to see if there's anybody from another committee here. I don't see anybody. So we have a lot of new members in addition to a new room. And so we'll go around and introduce ourselves, and then you can introduce yourselves and we'll go from there.
Good to see you again. Dave Iacoboni from Morrisville, representing the Lamoille, Washington District.
Good afternoon, welcome. John Spencer from Essex, Caledonia, and I'm from the town of Burke.
Thank you.
Hi, Mike Nigro of Bennington. Tom Stevens from Waterbury, representing the Washington Chittenden District.
Good afternoon, Jim Harrison from the town of Chittenden, and I represent.
Robin Shy from Middlebury, welcome.
Lily from Burlington, hello.
Trevor Squirrel, Underhill, and Jericho. Wayne LaRoche, Franklin 5, Highgate, Franklin, Berkshire, and Richford.
Hi, Mike Marucci. I represent the William Ford District in Southeast Runoff, but in Dummerston.
Hi, Lynn Dickinson, I represent St. Albans Town.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And for the record, good afternoon. My name is Chris Winters. I'm the Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families.
And Megan Smeaton, I'm the Financial Director for DCF.
And we were handed out, Aaron has given us things.
Yes, thank you. I think if with the chair's permission, we could start with just a broad overview and then we can go to the line.
Yeah, I think it'd be good for everybody to understand the scope of.
Excellent. And there are some acronyms in here. We will do our best to avoid using them. Spell them out where they do appear.
Thank you.
So here's an overview of our Budget Adjustment Act. First of all, the Department for Children and Families is a part of the Agency of Human Services. And our mission is to foster the healthy development, safety, well-being, and self-sufficiency of Vermonters. We have 6 divisions within the Department for Children and Families. We'll go over those in just a moment. But I will say that this proposed Budget Adjustment Act does represent a 1.7 decrease over the state fiscal year 25 budget as it was passed. With these adjustments are based on caseload trend, based on system care needs. It will also address technical corrections, revenue adjustments, and efforts to maximize federal funding wherever we can do that. And you can see the different fund sources in the 2 columns here and our amounts for our overall DCF budget.
So I'm going to pause you for a second. Would you like them to share the screen, or are you guys good? Yeah, I'm happy to find the way it is. Okay, great.
Under our current services and laws, you'll see some of the major buckets here in the BAA. Our 6 divisions are Economic Services, Family Services, and the Child Development Division. Those 3 divisions have deputy commissioners, and I'm sure you'll hear from them at some point, depending on what you'd like to learn more about. We also have the Office of Economic Opportunity, the Office of Child Support, and the Division of Disability Determination. Under these 4 buckets that you can see here of major changes in the BAA, we have adjustments to the Agency of Digital Services service level. This is under Economic Services, those agreement costs. Some caseload adjustments to AABD, which is Aid to the Aged, Blind, and Disabled. PNI, Megan, you're going to have to remind me what PNI is.
Personal Needs Issuance.
Personal Needs
In the
Issuance.
GA program.
Personal needs
Issuance.
issuance.
And the GA program, that stands for General Assistance, that's support services. That is not the hotel motel program, which is also in GA, and also the Reach Up program. That's what RUP stands for. Within the Family Services Division, we have adjustments based on the random moment in time study, the revenue impacts there, some transportation pressures, and some caseload savings. And we'll walk through each of those when we go line by line. Within the Child Development Division, we have caseload pressures to parent-child centers and the child care financial assistance, also known as CCFAP, caseload savings, and revenue realignment. Those are big items that we'll cover as we go through the BAA. And other revenue and rate adjustments are transfer of a position from the Office of Child Support to the Office of Economic Opportunity for the Permanent Supportive Housing Initiative, and also to realign targeted case management revenues and the TANF state plan, temporary aid for needy families. Two other buckets you'll find on the fifth slide. The OCS, Office of Child Support Mainframe Transition Planning. That's a $1 million one-time line item. That's a 34% general fund spend and a 66% federal match. So the general fund dollars are $340,000. That's funding for a feasibility study to transition the Office of Child Support off the existing mainframe as one of the last divisions on the access mainframe that needs to get off. And then the other one time here is the Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System. You might hear folks refer to that as CWIS, as a new IT system that's badly needed in the Family Services Division. This is a fund transfer. It's net neutral. It's to put $1.8 million of carry forward funding available for CWIS in the base appropriation to a one-time department ID to consolidate all of the CCWIS funding in one appropriation. There are also two other $3 million appropriations for that. So we have $7.8 million total for CCWIS, and that gets a 50% federal match. So we have 15.6 available for that project. Just two more pages here, talk a little bit about DCF's organizational structure. Our DCF budget is organized into 13 different appropriations. Those correspond to our DEPT IDs, our department IDs or programs. Some of the divisions have one ID for their entire budget. That's the Child Development Division, while others have separate IDs for specific programs, such as within our Economic Services Division. And you can see the breakout below for Economic Services. For family, Economic Services has an admin ID, an AABD, aid for the aged, blind, and disabled, general assistance, 3 squares, reach up, low income heating and energy assistance program, also known as LIHEAP. Then within Family Services, we have a general family services ID, as well as a secure residential treatment facility ID. The Child Development Division is one ID of its own, as is Child Support and Disability Determination Services. And lastly, the Office of Economic Opportunity has one main DEPT ID and one for weatherization. And so when you look at these IDs, also within ESD, Economic Services Division, the first one on the list here, under that admin DEPT ID is the Commissioner's Office, Staffing and Operating, the Business Office, Staffing and Operating, and our Agency of Digital Services operating costs. So hopefully that gives you a sense for how this is all laid out. And don't ask me the history or how it ended up that way, but that's where it is now.
So these numbers that are in here, committee, don't align, other than they both start with the number 3, with the B numbers in the budget. So that's the part that's missing in here for us, but I think hopefully with the people who have these budgets are pretty clear, and we'll get clear on that as we go through budgets.
Okay. Thank you. And now, with the chair's permission yet again, I'd like to turn it over to Megan Smeaton to walk you through the ups and downs line by line.
Was that this one there?
Yes, that's the narrative that we sent that has an explanation for every line. It aligns with the ups, downs, which you should have gotten from AHS at some point.
Yes, so we have. So this is the changes. This is the same thing in a different format.
Yes, so every line that's on the ups, downs has a corresponding, and it's in the same order on here.
But what it doesn't have on here are the numbers.
No, we did not put the B numbers on there. I could add that, I suppose.
Yeah, that's how we live and die.
So on the
It'll be on this one that we got given yesterday for
Yes, and I color coded it, so every time the color changes, you're switching to the next appropriation on your ups downs.
Okay, so this starts, if you have the big one from DCF on page 12. With E360.
And then next to that, where it says B316, you'll see a prop number, and then it says 344001. That aligns with what was on the slides, if that's helpful. Okay, so starting with admin, you'll see this same line in various appropriations as we go through our budget. It's the temporary assistance for needy families revenue realignment. So we use temporary assistance for needy families, or TANF, across our department in various divisions and programs. And we also use general fund to meet our state match, or what we call the maintenance of effort, the MOE, which is required as part of the TANF program. However, some expenses are only eligible to go on our TANF report in the federal line, and some can be either federal or maintenance effort. So this is kind of technical, but what we're trying to do here is align our federal revenue with the places where we have expenses that can only go on our federal report, and align our general fund with the places where we can have expenses that can be both federal or maintenance of effort, so that we can fully maximize our federal revenue and utilize our GF to meet this maintenance of effort requirements. So it's net neutral transfers of general fund and Fed fund, removing Fed fund to FSD, which has a lot of these federal only expenses. And then we're swapping general fund to places like admin and CDD, where we have expenses that can be used as a state match for that. So you'll see several of those lines. It's all the same larger moving of funding buckets. The next line is this carry forward. As Commissioner Winters said, we have money that we carried forward from last year as part of our closeout process, $1.8 million. We also have $6 million in a one-time appropriation. We want to move the 1.8 that's in our base into the one-time. This will make it easier to monitor and track and report on, and just to have all the funding in one place. So it's just really a clean move. We have two lines next for the SLA, or the service level agreement with ADS. One is the transfer of funding from AHS to us for the portion that they received for ADS, that is DCF's allocation. And the other is DCF's portion of the total need for the SLA beyond what AHS already received. And so those together make up DCF's increase to our portion of the SLA.
So were you surprised at the second line? That's almost 1.2 million. Sorry. The other, I know there's transfer from the central office and everybody got that. So that first line we knew about, but were you surprised about the second line? Information on why it was almost 1.2 million.
I mean, I think DCF has a fairly large ADS budget, so increases to DCF's budget, or to the ADS costs, will hit DCF's budget probably more than other departments. I mean,
Okay.
AHS splits it up. So that is everything in the admin appropriation. Does anybody have any other questions, or I can move on to FSD? So Family Services Division is yellow on the narrative. So we have a few technical corrections to start off with. We got some funding for funding was transferred from the Defender General's office to DCF as part of last year's budget, but it was put in the wrong major operating section. So it's just moving it from from grants and contracts to personal services. And then the same thing for the barge funding that the legislature provided to DCF last legislative session. It was put in personal services. We need to move it to grants. Then we have another TANF revenue realignment line, which we already talked about. We have the random moment time study matrix revenue adjustments. So DCF recently transitioned FSD to a new random moment time study. It's how we allocate time for our social workers across all of our funding sources. that are eligible for their work. And it uses a new matrix to allocate the funding that was approved by the public consulting group that we hired to make sure that we're in alignment with all federal allocation policies. We've had a year now to see how changes in this matrix have resulted in different allocation of expenses, and we're seeing a lot more expenses going towards general fund and less being driven towards our targeted case management, global commitment funding and other federal revenues. So this is just a backfilling of that loss of revenue once we've, updated our matrix. The next one is another revenue realignment between AHS and DCF. Again, just a technical adjustment based on how we're earning revenue. Then we have our 4E revenue replacement. DCF is not able to draw in 4E revenue for children that are in residential placements because we're not in compliance with the Family First Prevention Services fingerprinting rules. Basically, they state that you have to have the fingerprints processed and back before the person can start. And a lot of our residential placements allow people to shadow as they wait for fingerprinting to come back.
Could you tell us what Title 4E is?
It's a federal revenue source that we use for our foster care and other family services, child placement supports. And it's an entitlement. So the more revenue that we have, or the more expenses, eligible expenses we have, we can draw in the revenue for it. However, if we don't have expenses, we can't draw in the revenue. And so we had budgeted planning on a 14-day, the first 14 days that a child is in a residential placement, being able to charge those expenses as 4E expenses. But that we can't do that. So this is to put the general fund into the budget to cover those costs and ensure that we have sufficient funding for placements in residential facilities.
May I, could you just go over again why you can't charge for those 14 days? Is that to do the thing?
Yes, it's fingerprinting delays, yeah.
Will you be able to fix that in the future?
I believe that we are looking into ways to address that.
There are three parts to that, Representative. One is availability of local law enforcement or other places where you can get the fingerprints taken. Another is doing the background processing, and another is the VCIC, Vermont Crime Information Center, I think. I think that's within the Department of Public Safety, having the bandwidth to process them. And there are more and more professions and employers requiring it. So they have a pretty big backlog. So we're trying to see if we can get the machines on our own for our child development division. So for child care center, child care providers, and for family services for, foster care and other people working in.
Would that then be an allowable 4E expense?
I'm not sure if the machines are. That's a good question. We want to look into that, but it would speed up at least a portion of the process, but we'll still have the delays in BCIC unless they're staffed up, and we're looking into that as well.
Thank you.
Representative.
Does the fingerprinting go beyond 14 days? I mean, that's kind of a window to make that happen, but if it does go past that, what's that look like?
So the 14
Delay,
days,
obviously, here.
yeah, the 14 days is actually tied to the 4E requirements. You're not allowed after 14 days to use 4E, regardless of whether everyone was fingerprinted or not. It's just only allowable for the first 14 days. So that's not actually tied to the length of time that we're waiting on the fingerprints.
Thank you.
Are there any legal constraints or anything that will slow down or preclude you from being able to do the fingerprint?
There are a lot of constraints around it, as you might imagine, for someone to have access to that type of information, and you want them to be trusted in submitting fingerprints and things like that. So there are quite a few hoops to go through before we can get those machines and be able to operate those machines.
You think you should be able to overcome?
We should be able to, yes, sir.
So the next line on here is transportation overage. So FSD has contracts to transport children, and as we renew them and renegotiate them, the costs have substantially increased over the past few years, which has really created a budget deficit problem for FSD. There's, relatively few providers willing to provide the service to the state, and we have to procure it. So it makes it hard to find less expensive alternatives. So this is just to right-size the transportation budget to align it with the contract values. And this just includes all sorts of transport of children, everything from to school, between placements, to medical appointments, a variety of things. So the next one on here is two more, there's a technical correction. It's the other half of the Defender General net neutral transfer. And then there was funding that DCF received for the youth homelessness last year from the legislature, and it was placed in FSD. We believe it's best administered through our Office of Economic Opportunity, through their Housing Opportunity Program. So we're transferring the funding from FSD to OEO. The next line is UVM child safety contract increase. So UVM requires additional funding to be able to continue to provide child abuse mitigation services that DCF has a contract with UVM for. And this is really a critical service for our child abuse neglect investigations. We don't really have alternatives to using UVM for this. So it's just an increase to allow us to continue to fund that contract. The next three lines go together. So we received funding from the legislature in general fund and Fed fund last year for a post-permanency technical correction or technical increase, post-permanency increase. And we're doing a technical correction to change that to global commitment from GF and Fed fund, which is how the program is funded. Global commitment is a blended dollar. So it's a net neutral transfer of GF grossed up to GC in terms of general fund. So you'll see that the GC is a larger dollar amount because we can afford more of the global commitment with the general fund that we have. We broke it out into two lines. One shows the amount of the rate increase that we're proposing to provide to post-permanency initiative providers. And the other is the caseload increase. And we're proposing to use 43,917 of that to increase the number of beneficiaries by 13 per month.
Could we just,
Yes, go ahead.
would that be, for instance, a contractor like Easter Seals to work with the post-permanency placements and perhaps others?
I think that's correct, Representative. And just so everybody is clear, post-permanency are those supports provided to adoptive parents or legal guardians of children who were previously in DCF custody. And I think Easter Seals might fall into that category.
And if I could go back, just if I may, you mentioned 4E will only pay for up to 14 days.
If it's a residential placement, yes.
So after that, do you utilize like PNMI, private non-medical institutions, and bill Medicaid? Or is it 100% general fund?
So the residential is the private non-medical institutions in a lot of instances. If a child is at a PNMI, we bill Medicaid for the treatment portion of the cost. But for their room and board, we can bill 4E for the first 14 days, and then it becomes general fund after that.
Does it then go to the Department of Education, depending on it? Do they pay a portion of the room and board?
They pay the education costs. We pay the room and board.
Education cost, but you pay the room and board. Okay, thank you.
So then there's another half of the technical correction for barge that we had already talked about. And then we have our substitute care and subsidized adoption caseload adjustments. We project out our caseloads based on historical trends, both in the number of cases served in each of the various components of substitute care and subsidized adoptions, as well as the cost per case that changes based on the caseload composition. And that allows us to project out whether we have a surplus or a deficit in our budgets, and we are projecting some savings based on our known and historical caseload trends.
Oh, I think this is the first where I've seen utilization being lower of all the budgets that we've seen so far, unless I'm misremembering with that. So why, I mean, I suppose that means that's good because there are a few people that need your services, but do you have any sense of what's creating this reduction?
It's a complicated question with a complicated answer, of course, and we'd love to have the Deputy Commissioner Erica Radke in to talk about it at some point, but really pre-COVID, when we saw a spike in opioid use and abuse, we had, I think, something like 1,600 children in DCF custody. We are now at 900.
Oh, really?
So that trend has really come down. We also use we've had a lot of training around structured decision-making so that we're intervening only at the right times when it's absolutely necessary. So that caseload is going down, and it has an after effect on a number of our services with a lower case with a lower number of kids coming in, a lower number of
Right.
caseloads and supports needed after.
Great, sounds good.
So it sounds like you changed your methodology some. So changing your methodology always, so do you have a feeling whether or not the problem is less, or does it seem to be less because you changed methodology?
I think it's probably a combination of things, Representative. It would be hard to say one or the other, but I think both.
Thanks.
That is everything in B317. Moving on to the Child Development Division. So the first 4 lines really go together. So it's really, 2 moves for 2 entities, but we're doing the same thing for both of them. So I'll just sort of explain it together. So for the first line, funding to support Addison County Parent-Child Center, or ADPCC, is being transferred from DMH to DCF, so it can be included in our CIS bundle. Previously, DCF offered CIS to most of the state as part of our Children's Integrated Services. It's our early intervention services. So most of the state would have had DCF as this department that was providing the funding for CIS. But 2 of the regions were served via DMH in a multi-age program. And DMH is changing this partially in response to federal changes and expectations from mental health partners or designated agencies in Vermont. So we're transferring the portion associated with Children's Integrated Services back to CDD. And that's the same move that we're doing for NCSS, which serves Franklin and Grand Isle counties.
So we saw that this morning, I think, the other budget, and they said, when DCF comes in, we'll see the other half of it. And now we've seen both sides.
You've seen both sides.
Matching up.
Yeah, hopefully it's the same number.
Yeah, it looks good.
And then the other 2 lines there, DMH only reimbursed for Medicaid eligible youth, while DCF provides CIS services to Medicaid and non-Medicaid youth, which is a best practice alternative payment model for the Center for Medicaid Services. And so because we're providing services to children that are both Medicaid and non-Medicaid, there's a GF component to our CIS bundled rate that we need to support these 2 regions. So you'll see an additional line for both of those for the GF portion that's needed. So the next one is the TANF revenue realignment for CDD, which again goes back to the first topic. We have a transportation contract under earn in CDD, where because of the misalignment of the federal fiscal year and the state fiscal year starts on July 1, the federal fiscal year starts on October 1. The federal revenue didn't fall exactly, and we are short some revenue to support our transportation contracts in CDD. Part of the reason why we're doing all these TANF moves is to address that situation for future years, that we won't have that situation again. And the next one is the Child Care Financial Assistance Program caseload savings. So we've done a really extensive analysis of our caseload trends. We looked at total populations falling within each income band, the number of certificates in each income band, the rates for the income bands. We accounted for projected growth in newly admitted income brackets through the rest of the state fiscal year, and we are projecting. And with all of that, we're projecting a large surplus for the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. And this is largely due to a timing issue with the amount of time it takes for families in these higher income brackets that were just brought into the program this year to learn about and enroll in the program and see the benefits of it. We did use a conservative approach, so we weren't cutting too much, but we think that this is a one-time cut that can easily be absorbed within this CCFAP caseload savings.
We knew this was gonna, we heard from Commissioner Gresham that this was coming, and I'm probably not the only one with questions, but so I'm glad you acknowledge the fact that I think, and I'm not the expert on this, but as I understand it, the biggest expansion of who is of eligibility happened, or the last expansion, right, October 1st. And so there hasn't actually been a lot of time to see what the uptake is. And yet you're still reducing this. And this is this the 50, we put in 50 million in general fund for this? Is that what's being reduced? Is that original 50 million investment for this year in general fund? Because it's a special fund and I see.
The next line is the special fund. So this is, I mean, I think you could say that the general fund that was added is what's being reduced.
Yeah.
It's all mingled into one pot of general fund for CCFAP now. So given all of our funding sources, we believe that we have 13.08 million of general fund available that, given trends that we're seeing, even projecting upticks that we haven't seen yet happen, but we are being optimistic in the level of uptake that we see throughout the rest of the year. We still think that that is a funding that would fall to our bottom line otherwise.
And you're taking into account the payroll tax as well and how that's working, and do you have data on that yet, or is it too early for that? You must have some data.
So that's the next line on here. So the CCFAP e-board revenue shift. So in July, the Vermont e-board adopted the economist projections based on the child care payroll tax special fund. And that will be $13 million. And it's confusing because the two numbers are very similar.
Yes.
But that's just coincidence. So they basically, we have a budget appropriated for our special fund of 79.6 million. And the economist projected that the revenue collected would be 92.8 million. So that's 13.2 million over what was in our base budget appropriation. So this is just allowing us to offset the general fund with the special fund that can only be spent on the CCFAP program, and allow AHS to more flexibility in the use of the general funds to meet other agency-wide needs.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what it's always kind of risky to, claw back money from something when we don't know a lot about the interest in that program or in how well it's been advertised. And because that was actually something I had to spend a lot of time doing with my own constituents to let them know about the October change. So I'm just wondering what kind of outreach has the department done to how robust has it been, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I'd have to get back to you on that, Representative. I do know we've hired a marketing firm. I do know that has taken longer to get the word out through that marketing effort than we had anticipated. You'll start hearing a lot more about it. It's apparently kicking off another level, but that's not to say that we weren't doing other outreach efforts before without the marketing firm. So I could have happy to talk to you offline or bring back information for the committee about our outreach efforts around.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I know some childcare centers are letting the parents know. I don't know if you're helping them to.
And there are plenty of other outside interests that are also making this the state.
And this is, I'm correct, this is funding childcare facilities, right? I was on economics committee with Representative Kaczynski 3 years ago. And when this issue came in, and we learned how many facilities there were. We also learned there was a churn rate of about 50% per year. And that, at that time, I looked at the rules for those child centers, and I suggested they would look rather onerous. And there seemed to be a response because it went from 120 pages down to 100 pages. And so my question then is, have you increased the number of child centers in the state? And do you still have that kind of churn rate? Because people have to want to do it. I know we're also spending money to upgrade those facilities. We're putting money into those. And if somebody gets in one year and gets out the next, the investment that the state makes in those facilities is gone.
Right.
So can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of detail. I do know there is still a lot of churn. And I believe I heard that last month was the first time in a long time that more childcare centers opened than closed. So we do believe it's having an impact. It's coming around, but it's a long and slow process, I think, to build the workforce, to receive the training, to get the financial assistance and startup for many of these childcare centers.
There's another organization that has a lot of data around this because they've been tracking it. And I think we've increased the number of childcare slots by over 1,000, which is huge. I know in my town, we've had one childcare center is expanding by an additional 77. Another brand new place opened that has about 25 slots. So it's happening all over the place. And I'm not sure whether it was just the last month or the last quarter that there have been that change of more opening than closing. But the bill that we passed is already making a significant difference for parents and ultimately for businesses as well, because they can hire the workers because there's childcare. So we can share that information within the committee just so everybody is aware of what's happening. But it's been a good news story, for sure. Tom, sorry. Stevens.
So I'm just trying to wrap my head around this move of numbers. Each one is a separate number, though similar. So the caseload savings is coming from a general fund appropriation to DCF. How much of payroll tax does that pay for all of what's going on with the CC? Sorry, I don't have the CCPAP. Or is that an additive to it in a way that if you can just re-explain like where the first $13 million came from? I understand that you're transferring the child care payroll tax or from the special fund in order to cover the 13. It's not covering the 13 million if that's caseload savings. If you can hear, I'm a little confused. And then I have a second question about the tax itself and the fund itself.
Yes, so our CCFAP program is very large, and it is funded. We have a large budget for both the child care payments as well as other components of the program. And so our total child care budget is about 170 million for the CCFAP program. Of that, 69.6 million is funded with this special fund that is the child care payroll tax. Then there's federal dollars in there because we have some federal eligible expenses. And then there's about $56 million of general fund too. So when we're seeing the caseload savings, what we typically do is we earn all the federal revenue we can. So the first expenses are always the ones that go straight to the federal revenue, whatever they're eligible for. And then what's left is always the general fund at the end. And so when we have underspends, it's always general fund as the bottom bucket, the last place, because it's the most broad use that we can fund anyone, right? So we want to make sure that if somebody is eligible for a various funding source, we're able to charge their expenses to that source. So when we say we have a $13 million falling to the bottom, the budget at the end of the year, that $13 million is general fund by default. It's not funded by the special fund at all, but the special fund is there absorbing expenses that would otherwise have gone to general fund.
So is this 13, does that 13 million, if we say that the caseload savings was 13 million, does that affect any of the federal funding?
No.
Okay, and then on the payroll tax itself, will the tax be adjusted at any time in the near future is it too soon because the payroll tax has only been in for a relatively short amount of time. So is there a period of time where after 3 or 4 years, when you get an idea of what a stable-ish number is going to be, will the tax change up or down to what's needed?
I'm not sure,
That would be
Representative
ways
Stevens,
means.
but yeah,
I'm sure
that's,
they've got the built-in report that we passed the bill to review.
but definitely something to keep an eye on as we see uptake and revenues.
Because if we're taking in more money than we're required to have under what's written down now, the question is, do you expand it to use the money, or do you lessen the impact of a tax on the people who are paying?
And again, this is a one-time, because this is BAA, this is a one-time reduction. So I think it's important to remember that a lot of these savings come from the fact that people are still learning about the program and signing up for the program. And so I think it's too soon to project it out to future years.
Thank you.
Rep. Blumen?
Well, one of the intentions of the act was to boost the salaries of folks working in the sector, so that it was actually a job that you could live on. And I think that's kind of the third step in all of this. And I'm concerned, could we not get a jump start? And I'm throwing this out as a question. Again, it's really more to the committee, but could we get a jump start in this, get the ball rolling to make that possible more quickly than waiting till the FY26 budget. It's just, I've had a lot of conversations with childcare providers who are still having a very hard time supporting their workers, and and retention is always an issue. And so the key, I mean, that's a big part of what will make any of this work. So I just throw that out there for our consideration.
Is that something that DCF is, or I'm sorry, CDD has talked about? Do you know?
Not that I'm aware of, but I can check with the deputy commissioner there.
Any other questions on this part? Okay, let's continue.
So that's everything for B318, child development. Moving on to B319, Office of Child Support. There's just one thing on there. We are transferring one vacant position from the Office of Child Support to the Office of Economic Opportunity to support our permanent supportive housing new program that's starting up this year in the Office of Economic Opportunity. And that is all for 319. For B320, it's the aid to the aged, blind, and disabled. So this is a program that we pay the federal government to administer, to send out the payments on our behalf. So we pay them per payment that gets sent out. They've recently increased the cost that per payment. So we have a shortage in our administrative component of this program. So that's the first line. It's an increase to be able to pay the feds. And then there are two components of the actual benefits that go out. The first is the AABD benefit caseload. And that we are seeing coming in, actually, the cost per case is staying stable, but the number of cases that we're seeing in a month have decreased from where we budgeted or projected last year when we built the budget. And so we're seeing some savings there. And then the opposite is true for our Essential Persons Program, which provides support for caregivers of people who are eligible. And in that, we're seeing an increase in both the cost per case over what we budgeted and the number of cases.
Rebecca Cavoni.
Could you, so just maybe everybody knows this, but anyways, it's typically, I think, an SSI payment to the aged, blind, and disabled. There's a federal share, and Vermont is one of many states that also provides a state share, and that's the $58 a month. Could you, I didn't expect you to have it today, but could you tell me when that was last increased? And also, the 3,700 people on the program, if I could just get a little history of what that's looked like maybe for the last 5 years. Is it pretty stable? Is it constantly going down? And the way in which you calculate the essential persons payment, how is that payment determined? It's gone up. I'm just curious, why are they more essential? Are they doing different things? How do you calculate that?
Okay, we'll get back to you on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will say that we did provide a personal needs allowance increase this past year for most, because we got funding to do that last 2 years ago.
For the AABD
Yeah,
population?
for the GF portion,
Okay.
not the essential persons. So I can get you more
Was that for
details on what
GA
those
or
were.
was it for AABD?
AABD, yeah.
Thank you. If you could give me the history on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Would you mind just clarifying who essential persons are?
So this is a payment that we make to people who have caregivers that choose to care for them rather than have them seek care outside of their home.
So it's a payment to those caregivers who are maybe giving up something else to do this. Yeah, okay.
They're not necessarily related, but they could be?
Right.
Supposed to be.
Okay, thank you.
So that's ABD. Moving on to section B 321, general assistance. So general assistance is frequently thought of as the emergency housing program, but there are other things that are part of general assistance. And so we are doing some caseload adjustments here. The first one is our support services caseload. This is based off of prior year caseloads and cost per case trends, like all of our caseloads. And this covers things like burials, physician visits, dentals, and abortions. And then the next line is the personal needs issuance, or P&I. And again, we're seeing some decreased caseloads there. And those are one-time funding support for things like groceries and back rent and things like that. So next is our Three Squares Vermont. This is 100% federally funded. We are seeing some increased caseloads. And so it's just an increase in our spending authority of federal funding to cover those costs. So that is Three Squares Vermont. And then we have our Reach Out program, which is section B 323. And so we have some more caseload savings here. Caseload adjustments were based on projections from our expert consultant who has expertise in this area. And based on that average cost per case that we've seen from state fiscal year 24 and the trends there. And this shows that while the cost per case has been trending upwards over the past few years, our cases per month that forecasted by our consultant project to decrease. So the combination of those two moving forces leads to about a $500,000 savings.
You're saying the number of people has not gone down, but the cost has gone down, or the reverse?
No, the reverse. So the number of cases has
Gone down.
decreased,
Okay.
and the cost per case has gone slightly up.
Representative?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how recently, the reach up benefit allowances have been adjusted, or changed. I think the housing allowances dates back to 2001, based on the market then. And it would help to know, especially for the budget, what those figures are that go into a reach up budget and how, and when they were last adjusted to the market.
We'll get you some background information on that.
That's great, thanks.
Do you know when it was last adjusted?
I don't know.
Yeah, you don't.
Did not know that. I know today if I was working on some sort of, they've been asking us some questions about that space, so they may have. Okay, so that's reach up. We have no adjustments to our low income heating assistance program, or LIHEAP. So that brings us to the Office of Economic Opportunity, OEO. We have a few minor adjustments here. We're moving $100,000 from grants to personal services, supporting limited service position. That's part of the large expansion to the shelter program. And then we have the opposite of the transfer from OCS to OEO for that full-time position. And then the last line is the other half of the transfer from FSD to OEO for the youth homelessness services funding.
That was the one that was in the wrong spot, and it was the correct spot.
And that's the end. Those are all the changes in our budget proposal. We do have a one-time proposal as well for the OCS mainframe. But I guess I can pause there if there's any questions on the other steps.
No, not yet. I will.
Tip is the one who has that group of sections. We have several people to see what. Go ahead.
When it comes to the two programs you just listed about not changing weatherization and home heat, is that, can I extrapolate that you're on budget for that, or you're not using much, or that hasn't been as terribly cold on a degree day basis as it might have been in the past?
I mean, I guess I wouldn't extrapolate the weather from that, but I would say that both of those programs are not funded with general fund dollars. So they're funded with federal dollars. So it is sort of, and some special funds, some special taxes on people. So those are really limited to what the funding available is.
And you have a couple. We'll continue. So I think you said you have a couple things in the language, one time. So I'm guessing, right, it's probably on page 32, section 49, in the language section that we got from finance and management.
So the main one that Commissioner Winters already touched on is the mainframe OCS transition planning. So the Office of Child Support will soon be the last division remaining on our mainframe system. ESD and DIVA are moving off of it through the IE&E VTIES program, which is an integrated eligibility services program that they're working on setting up and procuring. And so this is, a few years off for ESD and DIVA, but OCS was not included in the IE&E project because it's not technically a beneficiary program. So the question is then, they can't stay on Access. Access is going away. What does OCS do? So this is to fund. So OCS put out an RFI, a request for information, and received some cost estimates from various bidders about what it would cost to build a system, as well as to do this transition planning. And the feds require that we do a feasibility study before they'll give us funding for an actual system. And so this is just the first step to do the feasibility study based on the costs that we heard back from the bidders as part of that RFI. And it is 66% federally funded. So that leaves us with 340,000 general fund need.
Yes, Brett Moore.
I understand your characterization of it's not a benefits program, but it does benefit the state. Is it bringing in money?
Yeah, it absolutely benefits the state in that it makes sure that children who are entitled to support get it. And that keeps them out of poverty, that keeps them away from other programs you have to pay for as a state.
It's not like you don't qualify for it based on like certain characteristics, right? Anyone can qualify for it.
Any other questions, Sue?
And so then the last one is just the opposite of the transfer of the 1.8 million into the one-time appropriation. So we took it out of admin, we're sticking it into the one-time appropriation so that we have all 7.8 million of our funding in one place.
Sounds efficient.
Efficiency is good.
Can I just,
Yes.
I love the way I just talked, can I just, without nudging you or anything?
Okay.
Sorry, you are the chair. So I'm just wondering, so this is a multi-phased project, which I bet the whole department is really excited about, and is long overdue. How long do you expect it to take, and what parts, have we begun the work on the first module?
Is this CC we're talking about?
Yes, no.
I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, the Child Welfare Information System, Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System, we have not. We went out to RFP in the spring. There were some technical errors in the RFP. We had to pull it back. We reissued in the summer. And in order to do that, we have to get permission from our federal overseers, the Administration for Children and Families. And they actually had additional changes that they wanted us to make. So actually this morning, we made those additional changes, resubmitted, because it's a very small change to language in the typical Agency of Digital Services contract. It's kind of some boilerplate that they took issue with, that we changed to their liking, to their specifications that they wanted us to use, sent it back today. We have been told it'll hopefully be just a couple of days turnaround, and then we'll be reissuing the RFP within a week or two. I don't even want to promise a week or two, but very soon, reissuing that RFP. Once we get bids, we'll kind of have a lay of the land of what it's going to cost, how long it's going to take. It's going to be a multi-year project. But we're looking at approaching this in a modular way. So what are case management? Is that the first thing we want to take on? What pieces do we have someone do first? We're working very closely with the Agency of Digital Services. There's a big project team ready to go on this. We're very excited for it. It's very much overdue and needed. We're one of the last states in the country to upgrade our system, and it'll bring a lot of benefit to both caseworkers, the children we're caring for, the data, the financial side of things, all of the above.
I'm so glad that we're gonna have an RFP out. I'm wondering, in this first module, will we satisfy the requirements, that, Title IV funding requires from state databases? Will we be able to draw down more federal money as a result of the completion of the first module? Is that a priority?
I'm trying to recall if that's tied, case management is what we're mostly looking at as our prime candidate for first module. I think that's where the 4E funding may come in. I'm not positive. I'd have to get back to you on that, but it will unlock some additional federal funding.
Okay. I'm done, sorry, thanks.
No, it's good. Checking to see if anybody else has any other questions. I am not seeing any. Let's see. We're on time. Oh. Is that everything?
I know it's surprising,
Excellent.
but relatively simple for one of the state's most complicated department budgets.
Well, I'm sure we'll hear more in the FY26 budget.
That'll be a little more complicated.
Now giving you a lot of things that which we'd like to hear back from you on, so
Yeah, thank you for your questions. We'll get back.
your assignments on that. So I guess if the committee doesn't have any more questions, you are free to leave.
Thank you.
And committee, we have corrections coming in at not till 2:45. I thought they wanted to get here at 2:30. We can just check. So we have a text group of this committee now. So be on the lookout, have your phone with you as you wander about. You're going to go talk to your other committees or whatever, but this will give you a little bit of time. So we'll just check and see if we're going to be back at 2:30.